finished, I think, all the way through 99. We've really got 5 more chapters to touch on. My intention was to just kind of zoom through this, and I will kind of try and do that because I want to get to some of the parallels at some point, so just start another sort of mini teaching on that with new source materials and stuff. But I'm still in the process of compiling it and sort of going over it myself. But starting with chapter 100, I just want you to kind of scan and look. There's a lot of just symbolism here. And so it's going to take a little bit to just sort of plow through it. But you have things like streams and blood and terms like dawn through sunset. Okay, so all of these things have a sort of symbolic meaning and a sort of symbolic reference. You know, you see words like sleep. What is that symbolically? And that kind of thing. We may get to the point where we're talking about rain and dew versus, let's say, snow and hail. Okay, so all of these things have a certain symbolic meaning. You know, when we read about stars, for example, we understand them to be angels and that kind of thing because the Bible explains these things to us. And the book of Enoch kind of does too. I mean, there's times where it talks about meteorological stuff, and so there's meaning there. There's times when it talks in terms of, you know, dawn and dusk and that kind of thing. We see this in the Gospel of Thomas, for example. Do not worry from dawn until sunset about what you are going to eat or drink, right? Spiritual food, spiritual drink, right? Or from sunset until dawn, I guess, about what you will wear, right? The idea is that there is always sort of like evening and morning, so to speak.
Right.
And that's all the way from the beginning, right? Evening and morning. If you sort of look at, for example, Genesis, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and if there's metaphorical aspect to it, you can see it as what is heavenly and what is earthly, right? And he, you know, I'm not talking about Genesis today, but just the idea is that you have a metaphorical sort of take on this too. You have the evening and the morning. You have the loss and the return, right? The morning star arises in your hearts, right? So again, you find that in the New Testament used metaphorically. So usually I try to just point out in the scriptures where it says certain things so that you don't have to take my word for it because the things are actually there and they're written. But just to kind of make a short story long, I guess, let me just dive into this, right? Okay, it says, in those days, in one place shall the fathers together with their sons be smitten. We see this like in 1 John, for example. He talks about 3 generations, right? He talks about the fathers, the young men, and the children, right? You know, I speak to you, fathers, I speak to you, young men, I speak to you. Because there's 3 generations, right? There is the testament of the father, right? And that kind of tracks. And there's this testament of the son, right? And then, of course, the Holy Spirit, right? Which the children are always sort of referred to as the elect, right? When you read the Gospel of Truth, for example, the whole thing is about the children who are to come. If you read the secret book of James, there's this whole thing where Peter and James or whatever, they're looking forward to children to come. So they fall into the, you know, the to come category, right? The one that is, was, and is to come, right? Everything sort of breaks down to this, but these are the generations, right? And so when even in the New Testament, where you see John speaking in those terms, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about 3 different dispensations, right? And how each one of them plays in all of that, right? So the idea is that there's this whole generational aspect from the Jews to the Christians. Like, for example, if we understand that there's going to be 3 revelations, the first one people are going to see it wrong. The second one people are also going to see it wrong. But the third one, they see it right. So the idea is that when Yeshua talks about the blind leading the blind, for example. Right? So the idea is that we adopt, for example, the idea of the canon from the Jews. They sort of invented the concept, if you will. These books are in and these books are out. If it is to be believed that the apostles taught out of the book of Enoch, that sort of blows this whole canon out of the water. So we can kind of see where there are the blind. And also, of course, because the Christians follow suit, remember the synagogue of Satan comes in and they influence the church. And eventually they are upended because at the time of the Philadelphians, the synagogue of Satan, right, has to go and bow before the Philadelphians, right? And so the idea is that all of this is undone with that third revelation or that third dispensation. And so, in other words, what we're going to find as we go through the book of Enoch is that there's this promise that that last generation will understand the words of this book. So the idea is to try and bring an understanding of the words of this book so that that can in fact come to pass. And again, you get that with the dead burying their own dead, right? You got the blind, spiritually blind. You got the dead, the spiritually dead, right? So when the dead bury, right, what do you bury with? With what? Earth, right? Right? So that burial entails the idea of earth or earthly teaching, lower level, right? And the dead are burying their own dead, right? Right? Because these are what? Oh, let me go and say goodbye to my mother and father and my family, right? You know what I'm saying? So the idea of the family is the idea is like the family of Jews, the family of Christians, so to speak. And this is in no way to denigrate Jews or Christians, but the idea is that if you're able to utilize human nature and human frailty, if you will, if you're able to, through that, by means of that, pull off, if you will, a miracle at the end of time, which is to say, to take out of the dead letter something which is spiritual, which has happened before, because that's the whole idea, the paradigm shift between Judaism and Christianity. All of this stuff that was prophesied of, about the suffering servant, about the coming of the Lord, right? The stuff that he talked about on the road to Emmaus, all of that stuff, it was a paradigm shift. You were supposed to understand it differently, right? And then he disappears in the flesh as if to make the point that, you know, as soon as they're done with the fleshly understanding, the flesh disappears, and then their hearts are burning, and they're able to go and articulate to other people because, you know, their hearts were changed. Their hearts were burning inside of them, you know, because they understood him to be the Lord, even though they didn't recognize him along the, you know, the metaphorical journey, which is symbolic of the passage of time. The same way that the sea is sort of symbolic of the passage of time. So the idea is that, you know, that a man shall not withhold his hand from slaying his sons and his sons' sons. The idea is that there is this intergenerational thing where you have, let me see if this one works any better. Yeah, where you have like, you know, the slaying the sons and the sons' sons, right? Because their influence here casts this long shadow. And that doesn't change until the revelation is fully given and understood. So the idea is that this is a metaphorical sort of spiritual sort of slaying, if you will. And that sort of makes itself obvious when you understand where they're going with this, because he makes a certain number of assertions about how we will come to understand all the words written in this book, but it's only after a certain time. So until we reach that point in time, we're going to walk in, you know, the flesh and blood understanding. You know that, for example, it says, yeah, a man shall not withhold his hand from slaying his sons and his sons' sons, and the sinner shall not withhold his hand from his honored brother. Again, Jews with Jews, Christians with Christians, if you want to see that spiritually. From dawn to sunset, right? In other words, until from the time that the mystery is revealed to the time that the mystery is concealed, right? They shall slay one another, metaphorically, and a horse shall walk up to the breast in the blood of sinners. So the blood, again, you know, in Revelation it speaks of blood metaphorically. You know, she is drunk with the blood of the prophets, right? Or that we have not listened to the prophets, and so, you know, we were given blood, so to speak, to drink. In other words, what our drink, if you will, was sort of the flesh and blood, the sort of the violence and the death and the loss of the mystery and all of the confusion that comes with it throughout the age. And the chariot shall be submerged to its height. Again, in a metaphorical sense, it means that it's just over and above their heads. They're completely submerged in it. They're immersed in it. You know, they're kind of like, mad, you're soaking in it, that kind of thing. Right? In those days, the angels shall descend into the secret places and gather together into one place all who brought down sin, and the Most High will rise on that day of judgment to execute judgment among the sinners. So, in other words, they're going to be working together on that day to try and thwart this and to try and oppose it. And over all the righteous and the holy, he will appoint guardians from among the holy angels. And that harkens back to chapter 1. I guess starting with verse 7, the earth will be wholly rent and sunder, and all that is upon the earth shall perish. In other words, everything that's founded on earthly teaching shall perish. And there shall be a judgment upon all, including the righteous, actually is missing from this. But it says, with the righteous he will make peace, and he will protect the elect, and mercy shall be upon them, and they shall all belong to God, and they shall all be blessed. And he shall be prospered and blessed, and he will help them all, and light shall appear to them, and he will make peace with them. So the idea is that he is going to guard us like the apple of his eye, so to speak, because he's waited a long time for this, and his word's not going to return to him void. So I suspect that anybody who puts their hand to the plow will probably be used until he makes an end to all wickedness and sin. And though the righteous sleep a long sleep, again, the metaphorical sleeping, Thomas talks about a metaphorical drunkenness, they shake off their wine, etc. There's just different metaphors that are used for this age of darkness, where we sleep spiritually, where we're dead spiritually, where we're drunk spiritually, where we stumble in the dark, those kinds of things, we walk at night. All these metaphors that refer to this age. And then the children of the earth shall see the wise in security. They'll understand that there is no basis for undercutting their arguments. They are in a strong position. And the children of the earth, of course, refers to the earthly people, the people who believe in earthly teachings, earthly kingdoms, earthly this, earthly that. And it says, and they shall understand all the words of this book. Why? Because the wise are able to articulate it. And so they are able to disseminate this information, like it speaks of a little bit later on in the book, not getting ahead of myself, but 105 it says, and in those days the Lord bade them to summon and testify to the children of earth, again, concerning their wisdom, right? So people of the earth will understand this, you know what I'm saying? So you see the connection. Show it to them, for ye are their guides, and a recompense over the whole earth, for I and my son, right? So he's including Yeshua here, shall be united with them forever in the path of uprightness in their lives, and ye shall have peace. Rejoice, ye children of uprightness. Amen. That's how the book basically ends. There's an appendix after that.
Where's it? Where's it?
Oh, that's 105.
That's 105.
Oh, you're 105.
105. Yeah, I just was making reference because that's sort of a foreshadowing of what's said. They said, they shall understand all the words of this book, and they shall recognize that their riches shall not be able to save them. So the children of the earth, the people who sold out to the earthly ways or whatever, they rely on their earthly riches, right? But in the overthrow of their sins, right, their riches won't save them. Again, the rich and the powerful, what do they say to the mountains? Fall upon us and protect us from, the one who's on the throne, right? You can't blame them because, the jig is up and their power is based on a lie. All of their teachings are based on a deception, which is manifest at that time because everybody shall come to understand the words of this book, right? And we've already shown that there's a canonical mechanism for the re-entry of this book into Christianity. So, they may suppress, they may try to deny and to suppress and to bolster up the false or whatever, but it's just going to collapse. And it says, woe to you sinners on the day of strong anguish. Ye who afflict the righteous and burn them with fire, you shall be requited according to your works. Woe to you, ye obstinate of heart, who watch in order to devise wickedness. And that, again, the scribes and the Pharisees, they were always looking for ways to trap Yeshua in his words or try to get him, to slip up so that they'd have some means of arresting him or something. And there's just people that are like that. And so you see with the early martyrs, you see people like Antipas or whatever, presumably they were speaking the truth because they're praised for speaking the truth and for standing up to the wicked. Woe to ye, ye obstinate of heart, you watch in order to devise wickedness, therefore shall fear come upon you, and there shall be none to help you. Woe to you, ye sinners, on account of the words of your mouth, and on account of the deeds of your hands, which your godlessness has wrought. So again, hands are associated with deeds, right? So when you see the healing of the shriveled hands, right, that means you're able to perform the deeds, if you will, of the Lord. And similarly, you know, your eyes are healed, you can see. So it's never just limited to the individual in the pericope. It's always sort of with reference to all of mankind. We all gain our sight.
Universal
We all gain our hearing. We're all able to do the deeds. We're all able to stand up and walk the path. You know what I'm saying? It's all symbolic, at least in that sense, because it all applies to us. So what he says to one, he says to all, right? So it's to everybody, just in our own way. Woe unto you, you sinners, on account of the words of your mouth, and on account of the deeds of your hands, which your godlessness has wrought. In blazing flames, worse than fire, shall ye burn. Again, the lake of fire. And again, fire is just destruction too. It's purification for some things, right? Like Yeshua, you know, he has a breastplate of gold, for example. His feet are as bronze that are burned in the fire, right? He's gone through this testing and this trial, right? You know, despise not the fiery trial, which is to try you, right? So fire is associated with trial. Fire is associated with consumption. Fire is associated with God. Our God is a consuming fire. Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, whoever is near to me is near to the fire, right? So the idea is that it has a refining effect on some and a destructive effect on others, just like the chaff gets burned up in the fire. So it just depends on what you're made of as to whether you burn up or not. And now know ye that from the angels he will inquire as to your deeds in heaven, and from the sun and the moon and the stars. And again, there's a whole metaphorical sort of section called the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, where you see the sun. Again, Genesis talks about that too, right? It talks about there's a greater light. Yeah, okay. Right, and the lesser, right, again, because there's the heavenly, right, the heavens, right, and then of course there's the lesser light, which is the moon, which is the light of the night, right, so that's earthly light, we would say, or lesser light, right. So the idea is that all of these things are tied together. There is a greater kingdom and there is a lesser kingdom, if you will, one which is of the day and one which is of the night, one which rules, you know, from the higher level, from heaven. And it says, in reference to your sins, because on earth ye execute judgment on the righteous, and he will summon to testify to you every cloud and mist and dew and rain, and they shall be withheld because of you from descending upon you, and they shall be mindful of your sins. So again, water has to do with the word. Usually has to do with the word. So we have word in various forms. So it kind of gives us the hint, right? So cloud, right? We talked about cloud, right? So water is associated with clouds, right? These people are clouds without water, right? It speaks of, right? Right. So the idea is that that's a form of the word, but it speaks of clouds without water, and of course, the cloud of witnesses, right? Behold, we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. By way of parallelism, behold, he cometh with clouds, and by way of parallelism in Enoch, behold, he cometh with 10,000s of his saints. So you see that clouds and 10,000s of his saints are associated. You see in Hebrews, we are a cloud of witnesses. That's, you know what I'm saying? And then they're differentiated from clouds of people who have no water, right? That's in Peter. So the idea that they're symbolic here. So we said cloud and mist and dew and rain. Okay, so the idea is that these are beneficial. That rain or water from above, heavenly scriptures, for example, dew forms on the surface of things, right? And so what it tends to do is, if you look at it, I used to do like macro photography a lot, and what it tends to do, if you look at it, is it takes things and it magnifies them, you know, through the lens of the dew. And so what it kind of symbolizes is the fact that that which is upon the ground, that which you already have, you get this sort of magnification of it, and you get it by means of the word, right? It's sort of magnified. The mist, that which is just sort of ambient, and that essentially brings the dew, right? I mean, it's all kind of interrelated, because clouds bring rain. Clouds essentially bring the mist and the dew or whatever. These things are all sort of related, and the book of Enoch kind of talks about that too in a way, about the way that the one borrows from the other and their kind of interrelatedness. It speaks to that elsewhere, but this is just touching on that. But that's just to kind of demystify what some of this stuff means. And then it says, okay, so in other words, none of this stuff will dawn on you. None of this stuff will happen to you as long as you continue to deny the truth and whatnot. And it says, now give presents to the rain that it be not withheld from coming upon you. So in other words, use your resources to help these people, right? Right, but it's not, well, I mean, he says, and now, in other words, probably before the time. But when it has received the gold and silver from you, that it may defend. But when the hoar frost and the snow with their chilliness, and all the snowstorms with all their plagues fall upon you, in these days you shall not be able to stand before them. So wherever you see like water in the form where chilliness is added, in terms of hail, that's judgment, that's damage, that's pain. You see the idea of the snow, the hoar frost, right? The idea that this is the frozen, chilly surface, which is also associated with the concept of a plague, right? So you can see all that's just sort of given to you. And in those days you shall not be able to stand before them. Why? Because it's too late. They could have used their resources to promote the truth before, but they didn't. They could have offered, if you will, a sacrifice to the truth, but they didn't. And so, of course, now it's too late. Observe the heavens, you children of heaven. Again, those are the ones who understand, right? The children of heaven are the ones who shall understand all the words of this book, and it speaks a little bit about them a little further on too. It says, in every work of the Most High, and fear him, and work no evil in his presence. If he closes the windows of heaven, and withholds the rain and the dew from descending on the earth, right? In other words, the earthly understanding, on your account, what will you do then? Right? Because they're culpable. And if he sends forth his anger upon you because of your deeds, you cannot petition him, for you spake proud and insolent words against his righteousness. Therefore you shall have no peace. And you shall, and see ye not the sailors of the ships, how their ships are tossed to and fro by the waves, and are shaken by the winds. So we see winds and waves, right? I mean, winds. Winds.
There's more markers right there.
Yeah, I'm just going to put this away. All right, so we already know about winds and waves, right? These men who are infiltrating the church are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their own shame, right? Or that a man that is unstable in his ways is like a wild wave of the sea, as James puts it, right? So these are unstable, right, men, and all the other words that Jude and Peter ascribe to these people, right, all sort of applies to these guys, right? And then, of course, the winds do not be blown around by every wind of doctrine, right? So the idea is that winds are associated with teachings, right? Peter, the church, looks upon the winds of the teachings, the doctrines of the unstable, tries to walk upon the waves, that is to say, among the unstable, the infiltrators of the church. But his only remedy, of course, is to look upon the logos, right? Right, which is walking out or transcending, if you will, all of this stuff, right? And it gives that parable two different ways, where he's coming from behind them across time and upon the sea, and they think he's a ghost, right? Because he's coming, walking upon the sea from behind them, and that's just not something you see every day, right? And so the idea is that there's another one where he's asleep in the stern, right? And so if the logos is sort of dormant or hibernating, or asleep, in other words, while you're out to sea, and there's all these winds of this false doctrine that is taught by these unstable people, these infiltrators of the church, right? In other words, you can see the metaphor. In other words, the logos actually stands up and rebukes all of this stuff and stills it, right? So the idea is that the idea of the winds and the waves or something, that's a metaphor that goes way back, all the way back to Enoch. So could just be, that he's pointing to this, or that this is the earliest reference to that we have, but it's kind of the same thing. Yeah, it says, and see ye not the sailors of the ships, how their ships are tossed to and fro by the waves, and are shaken by the winds, or in sore trouble. Again, do you not care that we're all going to die? Right? Kind of echoes that. And therefore do they not fear, because all their goodly possessions go out on the sea with them, and they have evil forebodings apart, that the sea shall swallow them, and they will perish therein. Again, do you not care that we're going to die? Right? Are not the entire sea and all of its waters and all of its movement the work of the Most High? So everything that happens in this Christian age, in other words, is by design. Right? And has he not set limits to its doings and confined it throughout by the sand, right? Again, like the righteous shall be as the sand of the sea, right? So that's kind of where we land, if you will, is at that point. And at his reproof it is afraid, and it dries up, and the fish die and all that is in it. Remember, Revelation says, and there was no more sea, right? But you sinners that are on the earth, fear him not. Why? Because their reasoning is earthly. And has he not made the heavens and the earth? Has he not made both levels of understanding and all that is therein? Everything that transpires, in other words, in all of history as a consequence of this particular division, if you will, between understanding and lack of understanding, right? Who has given understanding and wisdom to everything that moves on the earth and in the sea. Again, earth being the secular, the sea being God's people, founded upon the word of God. Do not the sailors of the ship fear the sea, yet sinners fear not the Most High. Again, he's asleep in the stern, right? Or he's coming from behind or from the past, right? And I don't know how much longer I've got, but I'll just read this real quick. In those days when he has brought forth a grievous fire upon you, whither will you flee, and where will you find deliverance? And when he launches forth his word against you, will you not be affrighted and fear? Because it's going to be an attack. Literally, this is power that he has given us to literally fling at these people, to literally throw in their face. And all the luminaries shall be affrighted with great fear. Again, the watchers shall quake, right? Just like it says in chapter 1, right? The watchers shall fear, shall tremble. And all the earth shall be affrighted and tremble and be alarmed. Again, you think earthquakes, that kind of thing. Everything that's founded upon the earth, in other words, is shaky. And the angels shall execute their commands. So everything's been held back for such a time, and shall seek to hide themselves from the presence of the great glory. Again, mountains fall upon us, right? Hide us from the presence of the great glory, in other words, right? And the children of the earth shall tremble and quake, again, because they are of the earth. And they see, of course, like it said just a minute ago, that the righteous are in safety and security, and that they have the angels guarding them and are over them. And you sinners shall be cursed forever, and shall have no peace. Fear not, ye souls of the righteous, and be hopeful, ye that have died in righteousness. And grieve not if your soul into Sheol has descended and grieved, and that in your life your body fare not according to your goodness, but wait for the day of judgment of sinners. Again, that's what this whole study is about, the idea of bringing it, crystallizing, in other words, all that is said about the judgment in this book, reinforcing it with the judgment as spoken in the canonical books that affirm this book, to understand that bolsters this argument and gives it a certain undeniability, which, it says, and grieve not that you're in this Sheol your soul has descended in grief, and that in your life your body fared not according to your goodness, but wait for the day of the judgment of sinners, and for the day of cursing and chastisement. Okay, and then of course it says, and yet when ye die, the sinners speak over you. As we die, so die the righteous. This is their way of thinking. And what benefit do they reap from their deeds? Like, what is the point of doing what is right? What is the point of standing up for what is right? What is the point of any of this stuff? We die, you die, the end, right? That's how they think, right? And so it's like, and what benefit do they reap from their deeds? Behold, even as we, so do they die in grief and darkness. And what do they have more than we? Because at that point, again, henceforth we are equal. And what will they receive, and what will they see forever? Behold, they too have died, and henceforth forever they shall see no light. And it corrects them. I tell you, sinners, you are content to eat and drink and rob and sin and strip men naked and acquire wealth and see good days. Have ye seen the righteous, how their end falls out, that no manner of violence is found in them until their death? Nevertheless they perished and became as though they had not been, and their spirits descended into Sheol and tribulation. Again, that goes back to the previous verse. And grieve not if your soul into Sheol has descended in grief, right? And that your body has not fared according to your goodness. And that's probably where I should end, because the whole thing, chapters 1 through 3 through 105, pretty much read as a
section.
Yeah, as kind of a conclusion where everything should be sort of read together. I'll probably plow through that. I guess next time I'm here, I should be able to come next weekend as well. And after that, what I hope to do is I'm trying to compile a list of parallels between the New Testament and the Book of Enoch. So I'm sort of slowly putting that together. I'm hoping that'll be done by week after next, so that I can at least give you the rudimentary version of that. It's not going to be exhaustive unless I find a really good resource and find the time to put it together, but failing that, I'm just putting it together myself. I think it'd be very interesting because it does shift the paradigm. If in fact this book is prior to the New Testament and they're using it over and over again, or at least alluding to the events, there may not be all direct quotes, but they're referring to very specific things within that book, or very specific, events. And if you could show that there is a dependence there and a usage, it just bolsters the claim that this was the original mystery of Christianity, the first love that was lost, in other words.
Yes.
Thank you.